You've whispered it to yourself at 2 a.m., haven't you? When their silence screamed louder than any goodbye, when their name still lived inside your chest, like a ghost refusing to leave. You don't fall in love gently. You crash, like a wave against rock, again and again, always hoping this time it won't hurt. But it does. They don't need to touch you to split you open. Their presence alone is enough. Their voice, their distance, their contradictions, they trigger a memory in you that has no name. And yet you stay. You chase. You bleed with grace. Why? Because something deeper than your mind chose them. Something older. Something darker. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The part of us we disown, suppress, exile. But it never disappears. It waits beneath your smile, beneath your "I'm fine," beneath your idea of love. And then someone walks in. They smell like your father's silence. They carry your mother's absence. They echo the exact rejection you never healed from. And somehow, it feels like home. That's not coincidence. It's chemistry between your shadow and theirs. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But not all reactions are divine. Some are detonations. And you weren't in love. You were in recognition. A soul recognizing a pattern. A wound remembering its architect. And that's the real trap. We think love is a choice of the heart. But often, it's a choice of the unconscious. So the question isn't, why do I love them? It's, which part of me is doing the choosing? Your joy, or your trauma, your heart, or your haunting? Because until you see who's choosing behind the curtain, you'll keep calling the same hurt destiny. So before we talk about them, let's talk about you. Not the you in the mirror, but the you in the dark. The one watching. Backhand index pointing right, and to do that, we need to step into Jung's world, where the shadow lives. And love isn't what you think it is. There's a hallway in your mind you never walk down. It has no light, no windows, just doors, heavy ones. Each one sealed shut not by a lock, but by your fear. You don't even know what you put behind them. You were too young when you began hiding things. The moment someone laughed at your tears. The moment your rage made a room go quiet. The moment your softness was called too much. So you closed the door. And another. This is your shadow. Not evil. Not broken. But exiled. Carl Jung didn't invent the shadow. He named it. He gave form to something we've always known in silence. That not all of us fits into the skin we wear. And the parts that don't die. They become unconscious. And from there, they begin to act. Not as monsters, but as magnets. You see it in your relationships. The woman who keeps attracting cold, distant men. Each one a mirror of her father's absence. The man who falls for wild, unpredictable women. Not because he loves chaos, but because he buried his own chaos too deep. We don't fall for people. We fall for symbols. For energies we've repressed. For qualities we disowned, then chased in others. That's why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Love, then, is often projection. Not of fantasy, but of forgotten pieces. This is what Jung called projection. The unconscious act of putting our own denied traits onto others. When you fall for someone's confidence, is it them you admire? Or the confidence you were never allowed to claim? When you can't stop thinking about someone emotionally unavailable, is it love? Or is it your shadow chasing the echo of emotional starvation you normalized in childhood? And this is the terrifying beauty of the unconscious. It doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't ask for permission. It moves you. You think you chose that person. You didn't. Your wound did. And until you see it, you'll keep mistaking it for fate. But there is a way out. Not through avoidance, not through overthinking, but through something far braver: integration. To integrate the shadow is not to fix yourself. It's to finally open the doors in that hallway, one by one, to meet the younger yous hiding there. The jealous one, the angry one, the sensual one, the lonely one. And instead of banishing them again, you say, I see you. I know why you acted that way. And I'm here now. Because the shadow is not your enemy. It's your compass. It's the part of you that holds everything you once needed, but couldn't express. When left unconscious, it manipulates your life from the dark, pulling you toward people, situations, and heartbreaks that feel mystical, but are really just familiar. But when brought to light, it becomes your power, your clarity, your truth. That's when you begin to love with awareness, not out of lack, not out of addiction, but out of wholeness. And isn't that what we all want? To be loved not for the mask we wear, but for all that we are, even the dark, especially the dark. So now that we've walked through that hallway together, just one corridor of it, let's take a deeper step, because the shadow doesn't only choose who we love, it chooses how we behave in love, how we disappear, pull close, push away, break down, and behind every confusing behavior is a story your shadow never got to finish. You see, when the shadow chooses who you love, it doesn't stop at the choice, it takes the wheel, and suddenly, love becomes less like a dance, and more like a storm with no eye. She pulls you close, then freezes. Her eyes flicker with desire, then fear. Her touch burns hot, then disappears into cold space. You ask her what's wrong. She says, I don't know. And maybe she really doesn't. He says he wants to build a life with you. Then he disappears for 3 days, returns like nothing happened. And when you bring it up, he laughs it off or grows distant. He's not cruel. He's just unreachable, but not always. Sometimes, he's the most present person you know. He listens, he gives, he says all the right things. Then one day, you feel him gone. Not physically, energetically, like something shut down behind his eyes. This isn't a game. It's not manipulation. It's not always narcissism or avoidant attachment. It's trauma, camouflaged in adult behavior. Because the shadow doesn't speak in words, it speaks in reactions. Disappearing, over-explaining, testing, pulling, withholding, performing. It's the woman who learned as a child that love is earned through pleasing. So now she shapeshifts into what you desire, and hates you for not seeing the real her underneath. It's the man who was taught that emotions are weakness. So now he can't cry, can't say he's scared. So he ruins good things before they get too real. That way, he gets to leave, instead of being left. Carl Jung once said, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. And in relationships, those disguises often wear the faces of lovers, each one triggering the unfinished story of the last. Let me tell you about Lena. She was 38, successful, sharp, could walk into any room and own it. But love, that was the riddle she couldn't solve. She always dated men who were emotionally erratic. One moment warm and poetic, the next unreachable and cold. They'd pull her in, make her feel seen, then vanish into silence. She called it passion. She said, I just have a thing for intensity. But in therapy, intensity began to have a different name. Uncertainty. It reminded her of childhood. Her father would hold her hand tightly at family dinners, then scream at her for the smallest mistake. He loved her, but he loved her inconsistently. And somewhere in her nervous system, she learned, love feels like walking on glass. So now, when a man made her feel safe, predictable, calm, she'd lose interest. He's nice, she'd say, but I just don't feel the spark. The spark, of course, was her nervous system bracing for chaos. And without it, her body didn't feel like it was love. Her shadow had equated uncertainty with intimacy, pain with passion. And so she kept choosing men who could never stay. Not because she wanted pain, but because pain was what she recognized as love. Let me show you the reverse. Daniel, 42, divorced, father of one. He fell for women who were emotionally raw, deep, expressive, poetic. But every time the relationship got serious, he'd find something to sabotage it. He'd get busy. He'd get distant. He'd start nitpicking things that never mattered before. I just don't know if she's the one, he'd say. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was this. When he was 11, his mother had a breakdown. He found her crying on the kitchen floor, unable to speak. He was too young to fix it, too helpless to help her. So he did the only thing a child can do. He froze. He stopped expressing his needs, became the strong one, the good boy, the protector. But he paid for that protection by exiling his own emotions. Now, decades later, when a woman showed real emotion, it touched something he wasn't allowed to feel, something still frozen. So he'd shut down, not because he didn't care, but because her aliveness awakened his buried fear. He confused emotional intimacy with being responsible for someone's pain, and that terrified him. His shadow wasn't rejecting love. It was protecting him from reliving helplessness. This is how the shadow works. It doesn't just choose who we're drawn to. It shapes how we respond. It edits our words. It pulls us toward danger, then punishes us for going. And most heartbreaks, they don't come from bad luck. They come from unconscious reenactment. So what do we do when we realize it's not just them, but us, too? Not as victims, but as co-authors. Because here's the truth no one teaches us. We repeat what we don't repair. And repetition isn't always obvious. It can look like attraction. It can wear the perfume of fate. It can be so seductive. You call it a type. But a type is often just your trauma, dressed better. And until you confront it, your love life becomes a loop. The same roles, the same heartbreak, the same questions left unanswered. Why does she always pull away when things get real? Why do I always become someone I don't recognize? Why does love feel like a high, followed by a crash? Carl Jung called this the power of the complex. Clusters of emotional energy formed from early experiences that live within the unconscious and erupt in moments of emotional charge. In other words, it's not just your shadow choosing, it's your entire emotional history. When she avoids commitment, she's not rejecting you. She's avoiding the prison love once was in her family. Maybe she saw her mother sacrifice everything. Maybe she made a vow, I'll never be trapped like that. So she self-sabotages, leaves before she's left, runs before she gets erased. When he clings and overgives, he's not being needy. He's reenacting the only strategy he had to stay loved. Make yourself useful. Never be a burden. Make her need you, so she won't leave you. These aren't conscious strategies. They're shadows moving through memory. And here's the most heartbreaking part. Sometimes, when two people meet, It's not their hearts falling in love. It's their wounds. A woman with a fear of abandonment meets a man afraid of engulfment. She clings. He distances. The more she needs, the more he withdraws. The more he withdraws, the more she panics. They call it chemistry. They call it passion. But really, it's a perfect storm of unmet needs, dancing to the music of childhood pain. You see this, don't you? You felt it. That familiar ache. That fire that isn't warm, but burning. And deep down, you've known. This isn't love. This is reenactment. But you stayed. Because the pain was familiar. And familiar feels safe. Even when it's slowly breaking you. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is where so many lose themselves. They confuse patterns for destiny, suffering for loyalty, trauma for truth. But there is a path out, and it does not begin with fixing them. It begins with asking a terrifying question. What part of me keeps inviting this? Not in blame, not in shame, but in radical responsibility. Because when you see the part of you that clings, you can hold it. When you meet the part that runs, you can sit with it. When you recognize the pain behind the patterns, you can choose differently. This is the beginning of healing. Not perfection, not detachment, but conscious love. Love that doesn't come from emptiness, but from integration, where you don't need to be saved, and you don't need to perform, where you can say, I see your shadow. I've met mine too. Let's walk, not to complete each other, but to be whole together. But before we get there, we must understand something deeper. Not just how we act through the shadow, but how they love through theirs. Because sometimes, the person you love doesn't love you. They love the mirror you hold up to their wound. And in the next breath, they hate you for it. Because when love touches the shadow, it awakens everything we swore we'd never feel again. They looked into your eyes and said things no one else dared to say. Words that felt like home. Promises whispered in that low, trembling tone, the kind that makes your bones believe before your mind can catch up. You thought they saw you, really saw you, but now you're not so sure. Because the person they once adored, admired, and couldn't stop calling, has suddenly become too much, too needy, too complicated. What changed? Nothing, except the shadow stepped out from behind the curtain. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it is even more terrifying to see yourself reflected in someone else, especially the parts you have spent your whole life denying. When someone loves you through the shadow, it often starts with fascination. They are drawn to a quality in you that they don't consciously recognize as their own disowned part. Maybe it's your softness, your calm, your chaos, your ambition. Whatever it is, it stirs something in them. Not attraction, activation. You are not a person, they do not yet see you. You are a mirror, a projection screen, a vessel for a part of themselves they cannot face directly. And so they chase you, not because of who you are, but because of how you make them feel. You make them feel alive, desired, worthy, powerful. You bring color to a part of them that was gray for years. They fall in love, not with your soul, but with what your presence unlocks inside theirs. It's intoxicating. They call it chemistry. They call it fate. But it's not you they love. It's the reflection, the illusion, the shadow. But illusions don't last. Mirrors eventually crack. Because to love someone truly, you must eventually confront who they really are, not just what they awaken in you. And here's the heartbreak. When the shadow is running the show, the moment they begin to truly see you, the magic fades. Or worse, it turns to blame. The man who loved how fearless you were begins to resent how much space you take up. The woman who adored your stability begins to call you boring, lifeless. The person who once said you made them feel whole now says you're too emotional, too complex. What shifted? Their projection shattered. The part of themselves they had placed onto you was too much to integrate. And now that the fantasy has worn off, they recoil, not because of you, but because their unconscious no longer feels safe. When someone loves you through the shadow, the relationship often feels extreme. Highs that make you feel like the center of the universe. Lows that leave you questioning your worth. Moments of divine intimacy followed by abrupt coldness. Why? Because they aren't loving you, they are loving the version of themselves they see when they're around you. And when that version threatens their identity, they withdraw, lash out, or disappear. This dynamic is more common than we think. And it's not limited to romantic love. We do it to friends, to leaders, to teachers. We elevate them to gods because they carry something we haven't found in ourselves. We project our unlived life onto them. But no one can carry your unlived life for long. So when they stumble, when they show their flaws, their limits, their humanity, we feel betrayed. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they broke the illusion. Jung called this the danger of the archetype, when someone embodies a larger-than-life role in your psyche. Not a person, but a symbol. And when we love a symbol, we don't love, it's worship. And worship always leads to disillusionment. Always. The tragedy is that many of us have never truly been loved. We've been worshipped, or used, or idealized, or feared, but not seen. And maybe we haven't truly loved either. We've chased reflections. We've mistaken activation for connection. We've fed our shadows with fantasy and called it love. But what happens when the fantasy ends? When the fantasy ends, the real work begins, or the real pain. Because now, stripped of illusion, you're no longer the mirror. You're just you, with needs, with contradictions, with your own shadow peeking through. And for someone who only loved the projected part of themselves they saw in you, this is unbearable. They may begin to resent you, to punish you for not staying perfect, for changing, for growing, for being real. But what they're truly angry at is the part of themselves you no longer protect them from seeing. It's cruel, in a quiet way. One moment they cling to you like breath. The next, they can't look you in the eyes. They pull away, not because you hurt them, but because you reflect their own inner fracture. And not everyone is ready to face that. This is how shadow love often ends, not in fire, but in fog, with confusion, with silence, with the slow vanishing of someone who once held your face like it was the center of their universe. And the ache it leaves behind is unlike any other, because it was never just them you lost. It was the part of you that felt finally seen, even if only through a fantasy. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And loving through the shadow is one of the most beautifully absurd things we do. It feels divine, but it's divine only in the way lightning is divine, brilliant, untouchable, and destined to burn out. And yet, there's a strange hope in all this. Because if someone can be drawn to the reflection of their shadow in you, that means you, too, have a reflection. And if you've been chosen for your light, your depth, your fire, it means those things exist in you, and they're worth loving, but only if they're seen for what they truly are. So how do we move forward? By doing the hardest thing of all, seeing clearly, refusing to carry projections that aren't ours, refusing to become someone's idea of salvation, refusing to shrink just to keep their fantasy alive. And when the next person comes, because they will, we learn to ask, do you see me, or just your missing pieces in my eyes? Do you love me, or the way I make you feel about yourself? And most importantly, am I loving from my wholeness, or from my shadow? Because the moment you stop acting as a mirror for other people's unconscious, the mirror turns inward. And that's where real intimacy begins. Not through fantasy, not through chaos, but through presence. Love that doesn't blind. Love that doesn't burn. love that sees, even in the dark. And yet, there is one more danger. Because even when you are aware of all this, when you've done the work, faced your shadow, owned your wounds, you are still not safe. Because there is a trap far more seductive than projection. A trap that looks like devotion, but is actually symbol worship. They don't love you, they worship you. And at first, that feels better. It feels holy, addictive, like something rare is finally happening after a lifetime of emotional starvation. They look at you as if you are the answer to questions they never dared speak out loud. You don't just make them smile, you give them meaning. But there is a price, and that price is your selfhood. Because when someone makes you their symbol, you're no longer allowed to be human. You become an idea, a fixation, a guiding light in their internal chaos. At first, this might feel like love. After all, who doesn't want to be admired? Who doesn't want to be chosen, not just as a partner, but as a revelation? But Jung warned us, the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is. And when you become someone's symbol, you are trapped inside their persona fantasy. You are no longer seen. You are performed. Elevated, yes, but elevation is another form of distance. The pedestal is just a prettier cage. You start to notice it in the little things. They don't listen to what you actually say, they hear what they need you to say. They don't care for your fatigue, your bad days, your cracks. Those things threaten the image. And so, you start hiding them. You play along. You become careful with your honesty. You smile when you want to cry. You speak in poetry instead of pain. You give and give because that's what the symbol does. It gives light. Until one day, you feel hollow. You don't know who you are without their gaze. You feel you must be on all the time. Be strong, be wise, be calm, be sexy, be deep. You are no longer loving. You are performing love. And still, it's never enough. Because no matter how hard you try, you will eventually fail the image they created. Not because you did something wrong, but because the image was never real to begin with. And when you break character, when you cry too hard, say something too honest, collapse in their arms instead of holding them, they flinch. Or worse, they turn cold. The light dims. Their devotion fades. The one who once called you sacred now says you've changed. But the truth is, you didn't change. You simply became real. And reality is a threat to fantasy. When someone is loving the symbol, they are not relating to you. They are relating to a projection of their own highest self, or their deepest unmet longing, and using you as the canvas. You are the divine feminine, the stoic masculine, the light in their darkness. But no human being can embody an archetype forever. Because archetypes aren't sustainable. They are psychological myths. And people are not myths. They breathe. They break. And yet, many of us, perhaps you, have worn the symbol willingly. Not out of arrogance, but out of hunger. Because it felt good to finally be needed. To be someone's lighthouse. To be the reason they stayed alive another day. You held their darkness like a sacred flame, thinking it made you strong. And maybe it did. But it also made you disappear. There is a hidden exhaustion that comes from being the symbol. It is the exhaustion of never being allowed to fall apart. Of always being the one who knows, who heals, who holds space. And when the person who once praised you now grows distant, because you've shown too much humanness, you begin to question your worth. You wonder if love will only come when you're glowing, when you're silent, when you're convenient. Carl Jung warned of this when he spoke of the inflation that comes from unconscious identification with an archetype. When you begin to believe that you are the savior, the healer, the muse, you lose your center. And then, when the pedestal crumbles, you fall harder than anyone else. Because you were never just playing the role. You were using it to feel enough. This is the paradox. You can become the symbol even when you don't want to. Because wounded people will assign it to you. And once you're inside their narrative, it's hard to escape. If you try to show your flaws, they may panic. They may attack. They may say, "You're not who I thought you were." And that's true, because who they thought you were was never real. You were just the container for a sacred projection. And here lies the most painful truth. When someone makes you their symbol, they don't just idealize you. They also resent you, because deep down, they know you're human, and knowing that terrifies them. So the very traits they worshipped in the beginning, they will try to punish later. Your freedom becomes irresponsibility. Your passion becomes selfishness. Your wisdom becomes manipulation. They tear down what they once built, not because you failed them, but because you reminded them of their own limits. So what do? You step off the pedestal. Gently, deliberately, you return to earth. You return to your body. You return to the small, beautiful, ordinary parts of yourself that never wanted to be divine, just loved. You begin to speak with your real voice. Cry when you need to. Set boundaries. Disappoint them. And yes, they may leave. But if they stay, after the symbol breaks, after the light flickers, after you've shown them your trembling hands, then maybe, finally, you are no longer being worshipped. You are being loved. But most won't stay. And that, too, is sacred. Because when you are no longer willing to be someone's projection, you create the space to be someone's truth. And truth is never glamorous. It is quiet, messy, uneven, but it is where real intimacy lives. And that, at last, is where the shadow no longer has to act. It can simply rest. So now we arrive at the ending, not of the story, but of the illusion. You've seen how your shadow chooses, how it acts, how it is mirrored, how it becomes myth. And now, in this final chapter, there is nothing left to say. Only silence. Only the slow echo of questions that have no answers. Because some stories don't end in clarity. They end in stillness. There's a silence that comes after a storm. Not the silence of peace, but of recognition. Of realizing that everything you thought was love might have been longing dressed in warmer clothes. That perhaps the one who broke you didn't betray you. They simply reflected something inside you that was already fractured. You sit with it. The memories, the questions, the weight of what could have been. If only they stayed, if only you had known more, healed sooner, spoken clearer. But the truth is, even if you had done everything right, it might still have ended the same. Because the soul doesn't seek comfort. It seeks integration. And sometimes, it uses heartbreak to get there. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And maybe that's what all this was for. Not to find the one, but to find the you that was buried beneath all the mirrors you tried to live inside. Because love, real love, isn't a reward. It's not something you earn by being perfect or by carrying someone's brokenness. It's not found in grand gestures, nor in promises whispered during twilight. It's found in the quiet moment when two people see each other, not as symbols, not as saviors, but as whole, trembling, luminous messes, and say, "I'm here, still here, even in the dark." But before you get there, there will be seasons of ache, of looking into old conversations and seeing the shadow puppets that danced between every word. You'll remember the way they looked at you like you were everything. And how that look slowly changed. Not because you stopped glowing, but because the glow was never yours to maintain. It was theirs to reclaim. And that's the heartbreak we rarely name, when someone walks away, not from you, but from the version of themselves they saw in your presence. So what now? You breathe. You come back to your body. You pick up the forgotten parts, the jealous one, the needy one, the fierce one, the soft one, and you say, you don't need to be hidden anymore. You begin to love without rescuing, to be seen without performing, to stand still even when the mirror breaks. And maybe you still miss them. That's okay. Some people aren't meant to stay. They're meant to shake the walls of your inner cathedral, so you finally hear the echo that was always yours. One day, you'll be walking, maybe through an old street, maybe through a dream, and you'll see someone who looks like them. Or maybe they'll appear only as a flicker, a scent, a chord in a song, a memory that brushes against you like wind. And for a moment, everything inside you will go still. Not because you want them back, not because you haven't healed, but because part of you remembers what it was like to be chosen, not for who you were, but for what you represented. And in that memory, you'll also remember who you were before all of it, before you became the symbol, before you gave away your silence to hold someone else's chaos, before you performed love in the shadows costume. And perhaps, if you're quiet enough in that moment, you'll hear your own voice return. Not the voice you used to keep them, not the one that soothed their fear, but the one you forgot while trying to matter in someone else's mythology. The voice of the self you abandoned, so they wouldn't leave. That voice doesn't say much, just one question, one quiet, ancient question. Now that you've stopped being what they needed, who are you ready to become? There is no answer. Not now, maybe not for years, but the question will remain. Like a soft knock on the inside of your chest, not demanding, just waiting. And if you can sit with it, without rushing, without reaching, you'll begin to notice something else. Something strange, something gentle. You're not chasing anymore. Not them, not validation, not even healing, just presence, breath, and the quiet knowing that you no longer have to be someone's mirror to be worth seeing. So the story ends, not with clarity, not with closure, but with you, alone, real, and finally, whole. If you're still here, if you've walked this far into the dark, maybe, just maybe, your shadow is no longer leading. It's walking beside you. If this touched something in you, don't rush to explain it. Let it echo. Let it live in your silence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll want to hear what comes next. Pushpin subscribe if your soul whispered yes. Candle, I'll meet you in the next story.